The courtroom was silent. Every eye was fixed on the woman standing at the plaintiff's table, her fingers trembling as she pressed a button on her phone. A voice filled the room. A voice that made the man seated across from her freeze in place. "Amber, you think you can take my money? You think any judge will believe you over me? You're nothing without me, and you always will be." It was his voice. Jason Monroe's voice. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Gasps. Whispers. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Jason's smug expression cracked for the first time that day. He had spent the entire hearing mocking Amber, rolling his eyes at her every word. When she had begged him to be fair, to settle things without a fight, he had laughed in her face. Now, he wasn't laughing. Amber's lawyer pressed another button. "Go ahead. Cry. Beg. It won't change a thing. I'll make sure you get nothing. Not a dime." The recording played on, one after the other. Every cruel word, every threat, every boast. The very things Jason had denied under oath were now echoing through the courtroom. Jason's lawyer went pale. Amber stood tall, her voice steady. "You said no one would believe me. Let's see if that's still true." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Monroe, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Jason opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence was deafening. 6 months earlier, Amber Monroe used to believe in fairy tales. She had believed that love, real love, was strong enough to overcome anything. She had believed that when two people built a life together, they would always stand by each other's side. But life had proven her wrong. Sitting alone in her tiny one-bedroom apartment, she stared at the divorce papers in her hands. The ink was smudged in places, stained by the silent tears she had shed when she first received them. Jason had sent them through his lawyer, cold and impersonal, as if she had been nothing more than an inconvenience in his life. After 8 years of marriage, he had walked away without a second thought. Not only had he left her, but he had also made sure to leave her with nothing. The house? Sold before she even knew what was happening. The bank accounts? Drained. The car? Repossessed. She had nothing but the clothes in her suitcase and a handful of dollars in her pocket. Amber had begged him to be fair. She wasn't asking for much, just enough to get back on her feet. Jason had laughed. "You think I owe you something?" He had sneered over the phone. "You didn't earn a dime of what I made. You sat at home while I built everything. I don't owe you a damn thing, but I supported you," Amber had whispered. "I was there for you every step of the way." Jason had chuckled. "Yeah? Well, guess what? I don't need you anymore." Then he hung up. The next day, the eviction notice arrived. Amber had been forced to crash on a friend's couch. She had no job, no savings, no way to fight back. Jason had played his cards perfectly. He knew she had nowhere to go. He knew she had always depended on him financially, and he was enjoying watching her struggle. But what Jason didn't know was that Amber had something he never expected. Proof. She had always been the quiet one in their marriage. She never argued, never fought back. She had learned to stay silent when Jason belittled her, when he called her worthless, when he reminded her over and over again that she would be nothing without him. But she had also learned to listen and to record. For years, she had kept the recordings. At first, she didn't even know why. Maybe she had hoped that one day, she would be brave enough to play them back and hear the truth for herself. Now, those recordings were all she had, and she was going to use them. The first step was finding a lawyer. That was easier said than done. No one wanted to take her case without a retainer fee, and she had nothing. Every door she knocked on slammed shut in her face. Until she met Daniel Reed. Daniel was different. He didn't ask about money first. He asked about the truth. When Amber told him her story, he sat back in his chair, his sharp blue eyes studying her carefully. "You said you have recordings?" he asked. Amber nodded and pulled out her phone. "I have dozens." Daniel took a long breath, then leaned forward. "Amber, if what you're telling me is true, your ex-husband is in for a nasty surprise." For the first time in months, hope flickered inside her. But Jason wasn't done playing games. The next day, Amber found out that he had filed a motion to dismiss her case. His reason? He claimed she was lying, that she was just a bitter ex-wife trying to steal his money. Jason had the best lawyers money could buy. He had influence, power, connections. Amber had nothing, and yet, she wasn't scared anymore. Not this time. Not when she had the truth on her side. So she stood outside the courthouse that morning, staring up at the massive building where her fate would be decided. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The battle was just beginning, but Amber wasn't backing down. The courtroom was filled with tension as Jason sat on the stand, his face twisted in arrogance. "She's lying," he said smoothly. "She just wants my money. I tried to help her, but she refused. I was generous. And now she's trying to destroy my reputation." Amber sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Jason smirked at her, then looked at the judge. "Your Honor, my ex-wife is desperate. I sympathize, I really do, but—" Amber's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client has evidence." Jason rolled his eyes. "Oh, please. What evidence?" That's when Amber pulled out her phone. She hit play. Jason's voice filled the courtroom. "You're nothing without me." A ripple of shock spread across the room. Jason's smirk disappeared. Amber hit play again. "I'll make sure you get nothing. Not a dime." The courtroom gasped. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Monroe," he said, "I suggest you start telling the truth." Jason swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, he was speechless. And this was only the beginning. Jason's face turned pale as the recordings echoed through the courtroom. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside him, whispering something in his ear. But for the first time, Jason wasn't smirking. He wasn't laughing. He was caught. Amber kept her chin up, her fingers tightening around her phone. She had waited for this moment. The moment Jason would realize that his power, his arrogance, wouldn't protect him anymore. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Monroe, would you like to explain why these recordings contradict your previous statements?" Jason opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The courtroom was silent, waiting. His confidence had vanished. But just when Amber thought she had won, Jason leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smirked. "These recordings don't prove anything," he said smoothly. "For all we know, they're edited. Taken out of context." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Amber's lawyer, Daniel Reed, didn't blink. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm, "these recordings are unedited. We have timestamps, multiple clips over the course of months. They paint a very clear picture." Jason scoffed. "Oh, please. You really expect a judge to believe that? This is ridiculous." Amber's heart pounded in her chest. She had expected Jason to crumble, to panic. Instead, he was doing what he always did, twisting the truth, making her seem like the liar. The judge held up a hand. "Enough. I will review the recordings fully before making any rulings. Court is adjourned until tomorrow." The gavel struck. The tension in the room exploded as everyone stood. Jason turned to his lawyer, whispering furiously. Amber felt Daniel's reassuring touch on her arm. "You did great," he said. "But this isn't over." Amber knew that. She also knew Jason wasn't done fighting. That evening, Amber sat alone in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. She should have felt victorious. She had finally stood up to Jason, exposed his lies. But his smirk haunted her. That arrogant, knowing look. He wasn't worried. He was planning something. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think you won? You're pathetic." Amber's stomach twisted. "Jason." Then another message. "Enjoy your little victory. It won't last." Amber's hands shook. She wanted to ignore it, but she knew better. Jason didn't make empty threats. He had already taken everything from her. What more could he do? Her mind spun with possibilities. Would he try to bribe the judge? Destroy the evidence? Or worse, make her disappear? A knock at the door startled her. Her breath caught. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she got up, her heart pounding. Another knock. Harder this time. "Amber," a familiar voice called through the door. "Daniel." She exhaled sharply and unlocked the door. He stepped inside, his face tense. "I figured you'd be on edge after today," he said. "You okay?" She showed him the messages. His jaw clenched. "He's trying to intimidate you." Amber swallowed. "It's working," Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We'll get a restraining order first thing in the morning. Until then, I want you to stay somewhere safe. Amber shook her head. I don't have anywhere to go. Daniel hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he said, You can stay at my place. Amber blinked. What? I have a guest room, he said quickly. It's just for the night. I don't trust Jason, and I'd rather know you're safe. Amber hesitated, but she couldn't deny the truth. She was scared. Jason had destroyed her life once. He wouldn't stop now. Okay, she whispered. Daniel nodded. Pack a bag. We're leaving now. As Amber stuffed some clothes into her backpack, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. And she was right. Jason Monroe was furious. He stormed into his penthouse, throwing his jacket onto the couch. His lawyer, Richard Hayes, followed him in, looking frustrated. You're losing control, Richard said. Those recordings were a disaster. Jason clenched his jaw. She won't win. Richard sighed. Jason, listen to me. You might need to consider a settlement. No, Jason's voice was sharp, final. She doesn't deserve a penny. Richard ran a hand over his face. Then you'd better pray we can discredit those recordings. Because right now, the judge isn't on your side. Jason smirked. I have a better idea. Richard frowned. What? Jason leaned in, his voice low. We make Amber disappear. Richard's face paled. Oh. Jason chuckled. Relax. I don't mean kill her. But what if she vanished? Couldn't make it to court? Richard swallowed hard. That's dangerous. Jason grinned. So is losing. And I don't lose. Amber woke up in Daniel's guest room, her mind foggy with exhaustion. She had barely slept, tossing and turning, wondering what Jason would do next. She got up and walked into the kitchen. Daniel was already there, drinking coffee. Morning, he said. Did you sleep? Amber shook her head. He slid a cup toward her. Drink. You'll need your strength for today. She took the coffee, her hands still shaky. You think Jason will show up? Daniel exhaled slowly. Oh, he'll show up. But the question is, what is he planning? Amber had no answer, but she had a feeling they were about to find out. And she was right. Just as she took a sip of coffee, Daniel's phone rang. He answered, his face instantly darkening. What? He snapped. Amber watched, her stomach twisting. Daniel's hand tightened around the phone. Are you serious? Amber's heart pounded. What's happening? Daniel hung up, his expression grim. The evidence, he said slowly. The recordings. Amber's breath caught. What about them? Daniel looked her in the eye. They're gone. Amber's world tilted. What? She whispered. Someone broke into my office last night. Daniel's voice was tight with anger. They wiped everything. Amber's blood ran cold. Jason. He had struck again. And this time, he might have one. Amber's hands trembled as she gripped the coffee mug. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on her. Gone, she whispered, barely able to process the word. Daniel's jaw was tight, his fists clenched. Every file, every recording. My office was trashed. Whoever did it knew exactly what to look for. Amber's breath came fast and shallow. It was Jason. Daniel nodded grimly. No doubt. And now we have no physical evidence to bring to court. Amber shook her head violently. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Those recordings were everything. They proved what he did. Without them, she couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I have backups of some files, but not the full recordings. And the ones I do have are in a cloud drive, which... He hesitated. Amber's heart sank. Which what? Daniel's expression darkened. Which I can't access. My passwords were changed overnight. The world spun around Amber. Jason had thought of everything. He had waited, watched, and struck at the perfect moment. What do we do? She asked, her voice small. Daniel sighed. We fight back. But we have to move fast. Jason's trying to make sure you have nothing to stand on when we go to court tomorrow. Amber felt her stomach twist. Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours until she had to stand before the judge again. And now, her strongest weapon was gone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and swore under his breath. Amber's heart pounded. What now? Daniel turned the screen toward her. A news article. The headline made her blood run cold. Ex-wife of tech CEO files baseless lawsuit for money. Court battle heats up. Below it was a picture of Jason looking calm, collected, and oh so sympathetic. The article painted Amber as a bitter ex-wife, someone desperate for cash, using fabricated evidence to take down a successful man. Amber felt like she might throw up. He's controlling the narrative, Daniel muttered. He's making you look like a liar before you even get to speak. Amber gripped the table to keep from collapsing. He's always one step ahead. Daniel's eyes burned with determination. Not for long. Amber wanted to believe him, but she had seen Jason's cruelty firsthand. She knew he wasn't done. Not even close. Jason Monroe leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of whiskey. Across from him, his private investigator, Victor Sloan, sat with a smirk. "It's done," Victor said. "Her lawyer's office was a mess when we left. No way they'll recover those files in time." Jason smirked. "Good. And the article?" Victor slid his phone across the desk. Jason glanced at it, nodding in approval. The headline was exactly what he wanted. The court of public opinion was already on his side. "Let's make this even harder for her," Jason said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "What's next?" Jason leaned forward, his voice cold and calculated. "Find out where she's staying. I want eyes on her. I want to know her every move." Victor nodded. "Consider it done." Jason grinned. "Amber thinks she can fight me." He took a slow sip of whiskey, savoring the moment. "Let's remind her why she always loses." Amber's pulse raced as she and Daniel walked through the city streets later that evening. She had insisted on getting out of the apartment for some air, but now she wasn't sure it was a good idea. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Daniel must have noticed her tension because he glanced around, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Something wrong?" Amber hesitated. I feel like we're being followed." Daniel didn't laugh. Didn't tell her she was paranoid. He simply nodded and slowed his pace. "Let's test that theory." They stopped at a small cafe, stepping inside and watching through the glass windows. Then Amber saw it. A man in a dark hoodie, lingering across the street. He wasn't looking at them, not directly, but he wasn't moving either. Amber's throat tightened. "Jason sent someone," she whispered. Daniel's face hardened. "Yeah, and I don't like that we don't know why." Amber's mind raced. What if he's not just watching? What if Jason's planning something worse? Daniel exhaled. "Let's not wait to find out." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Detective, this is Daniel Reed. We need to talk about Jason Monroe." Amber's hands clenched into fists. Jason thought he could keep winning. He thought he could scare her into silence. He was wrong, because for the first time in her life, Amber was ready to fight back. And this time, she wasn't alone. Amber clutched her coffee cup, her fingers trembling slightly as she sat in the cafe beside Daniel. The man in the hoodie was still there, across the street, barely moving. He was waiting, watching. Daniel lowered his phone from his ear. "The detective's on his way." Amber swallowed hard. "Do you think he'll do anything? The guy across the street?" Daniel's jaw was tight. "Not here. Not in public." Amber's mind raced. She knew Jason. He never made a move unless he was sure he would win. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a message. Jason was telling her, "I see you. I own you. You can't escape me." The thought made her stomach churn. A few minutes later, the cafe door swung open. A tall man in a dark suit walked in, scanning the room before spotting them. Detective Carter West. He sat down, his sharp brown eyes locking onto Amber's. "Tell me everything." Amber took a deep breath and explained everything. Jason's threats, the destroyed evidence, the messages, and now, the man across the street. Carter listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're right to be worried." Amber's chest tightened. "So, what do we do?" Carter glanced out the window, his eyes narrowing at the hooded man. "First, we find out who he is." He pulled out his phone, murmuring something to an officer on the other end. Then he turned back to Amber. "In the meantime, you need protection." Amber felt her throat close up. Protection. This was real. This was serious. Daniel shifted in his seat. I was thinking the same thing. She can't go back to her apartment. Amber hesitated. I don't want to run. Carter gave her a level look. It's not running. It's being smart. Amber clenched her fists. Jason had taken everything from her. Her home, her stability, her dignity. She wouldn't let him take her freedom, too. But she also knew she had to be careful. Fine, she said quietly. Where do I go? Carter exhaled. I'll arrange something. For now, stay close to Daniel. We'll keep eyes on you. Amber nodded. But deep inside, she knew one thing for certain. Jason wasn't done, and he was about to prove it. Jason Monroe tapped his fingers against his desk, eyes locked on his computer screen. A new message appeared. She's with the lawyer and a cop. Looks like they know we're watching. Jason smirked. Of course they do. But it didn't matter. He wasn't planning on watching forever. His phone buzzed. He answered. Tell me it's done. A deep voice responded. Almost. We've got her eviction finalized. She'll have nowhere to go. Jason grinned. And the bank accounts? Frozen, just like you asked. She won't have access to a dime. Jason leaned back, feeling satisfied. Amber thought she was strong. She thought she had a chance. He was about to remind her who she was dealing with. Later that night, Amber sat in Daniel's apartment, exhaustion pressing down on her. She wanted to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jason smirk. Daniel walked in with 2 cups of tea. I figured you could use this. Amber took one with a grateful nod. Thanks. For a moment, they sat in silence. Then, Daniel sighed. Amber, what happens if Jason wins? She stiffened. He won't. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I need you to be prepared. If the judge rules against you, Jason could walk away without giving you a penny. Amber swallowed hard. I know. She didn't want to think about it, but she had to. If Jason won, she would have nothing. No money, no home, no job. And worst of all, he would win. Amber straightened her shoulders. Then I'll start over. Daniel studied her, then nodded. You're stronger than you think. Amber let out a shaky breath. I have to be. But just as the words left her lips, Daniel's phone rang. He frowned and picked it up. Read. Amber watched his face carefully. Then his expression dropped. What? His voice was sharp. Amber sat up, heart pounding. What happened? Daniel ended the call. His jaw clenched. That was Carter. He took a breath. Jason just froze your bank accounts. Amber's stomach lurched. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was striking, and she had no idea how to stop him. Amber's vision blurred as Daniel's words sank in. Jason just froze your bank accounts. She gripped the couch cushion beneath her, trying to steady herself. How? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's face was tense. He still has financial control over some of the joint assets you had when you were married. He must have pulled some strings to make sure you can't access anything. Amber's stomach twisted. But I don't have anything left. He already drained everything after the divorce. Daniel exhaled sharply, his grip tightening around his phone. That's the point. He's making sure you can't even survive while you fight him in court. Amber's hands clenched into fists. Jason wanted her helpless, dependent, powerless. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back into the moment. She hesitated before picking it up. Unknown number. Looks like you're out of luck, sweetheart. Her fingers trembled. Another message followed. Give up now, and I might be generous. The room felt suffocating. Jason was taunting her. He wanted her to break. Daniel leaned over, reading the messages. His face darkened. Block the number. Amber swallowed the lump in her throat. He'll just use another one. Daniel's jaw tensed. Then we hit back harder. Amber's heart pounded. How? Daniel's phone rang again. He snatched it up. Read. A pause. Then his expression turned grim. Understood. He ended the call and turned to Amber, his voice tight. It's worse than we thought. Amber's breath hitched. What now? Daniel hesitated. Jason didn't just freeze your bank accounts. He filed a motion to evict you from your apartment. The words hit her like a slap. What? Daniel's expression was grave. If the court approves it, you'll be locked out of your place by the end of the week. Amber's hands went cold. He wants me homeless. Daniel nodded grimly. He's trying to cut off every option you have. Amber felt dizzy. Jason wasn't just fighting her in court anymore. He was waging war. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to breathe. When she opened them, she saw Daniel watching her carefully. "Amber," he said quietly, "this is going to get worse before it gets better." She swallowed hard. "Then we need to be ready." Daniel's lips pressed together. "We'll fight him. But I need to ask you something." Amber nodded slowly. "What is it?" Daniel hesitated. "Are you willing to take this public?" Amber froze. "Public?" Daniel leaned forward. "Jason's controlling the media right now. He's shaping the narrative. If we don't push back, people will believe him." Amber's pulse quickened. "You mean, tell my side?" Daniel nodded. "We go to the press. Share your story. Show them who Jason really is." Amber's stomach twisted. The thought of opening herself up to the world, letting strangers judge her, felt terrifying. But then she thought about Jason, how he had taken everything from her, how he was still trying to break her, and how he thought she was too weak to fight back. She lifted her chin. "Let's do it." Daniel's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we start tonight." Jason Monroe sat in his penthouse, sipping another glass of whiskey, his confidence growing with each passing minute. He had frozen Amber's accounts. She had no money. He had put her apartment under eviction. Soon, she would have no home. The media was already painting her as a desperate, gold-digging ex-wife. She was running out of options. And soon, she would have no choice but to crawl back, beg for mercy. His phone buzzed. A new article headline flashed on the screen. Exclusive. Amber Monroe speaks out against ex-husband. Shocking allegations reveal. Jason's smirk vanished. He sat up straight, clicking the link. His blood boiled as he read the article. Amber had gone to the press. She had told her story. All of it. The recordings. The threats. The frozen accounts. The eviction. And worst of all, people were believing her. The comments section was flooded with outrage. What kind of monster freezes his ex-wife's bank account? She stood by him for 8 years, and he left her with nothing? He's a coward. Jason Monroe is done. I'll never support his company again. Jason's grip tightened around his glass. Amber had struck back. His jaw clenched. Fine. If she wanted war, she was going to get it. And this time, he wasn't going to play nice. Jason Monroe wasn't the type of man to lose. He had built his empire by being ruthless, by crushing anyone who stood in his way. Amber had been nothing more than an afterthought, a wife he no longer needed, a problem he had thought he'd solved. But now, she had become something else, a threat, and threats needed to be eliminated. He picked up his phone, dialing a number. The voice on the other end answered quickly. "Yes, sir." Jason's voice was cold. "I want you to fix this." A pause. "What do you mean by fix?" Jason smirked, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "I mean, I want Amber to regret this. The article, the lawsuit, everything. Make her life a nightmare." The voice hesitated. "Sir, Jason's smirk vanished. "Do you want to get paid or not?" A beat of silence. Then, finally, "Understood." Jason ended the call, leaning back in his chair. Amber thought she was winning. She had no idea what was coming. Amber woke up to chaos. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages, notifications, and missed calls. When she finally sat up and unlocked it, her stomach dropped. Hundreds of messages, emails, comments. Some were supportive. People who believed her story. People who saw Jason for what he really was. But then there were the others. The threats. The accusations. The cruel, vile words from strangers who had swallowed Jason's lies without question. She scrolled through them, her chest tightening. "You're a liar. Gold-digging snake. You just want his money. Pathetic. You ruined his life. Now he's going to ruin yours." Then she saw an email that made her blood run cold. "Unknown sender. You should have stayed quiet." Amber's hands shook. Jason. She knew it was him. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. He wanted her scared. He wanted her to break. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. A knock at the door made her jump. "Daniel." She quickly unlocked the door, her heart still pounding. "It's happening." she said the second he stepped in. Jason's hitting back. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She handed him her phone, showing him the messages. His face darkened as he scrolled. Damn it. Amber swallowed. What do we do? Daniel exhaled sharply. We go to the police. Amber hesitated. You think they'll actually do anything? Daniel's expression was hard. They'll have to. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. Jason's waging a full-on smear campaign against you. And if these threats escalate... Amber shivered. I don't even want to think about that. Daniel grabbed his coat. Then don't. Just grab your things. We're leaving. Amber frowned. Where are we going? Daniel's eyes met hers. Somewhere Jason can't reach you. The police station was cold, sterile, and unsettling. Amber sat in a chair beside Daniel as Detective Carter flipped through the stack of printed threats they had brought in. This is bad, he muttered, shaking his head. Really bad. Amber bit her lip. Can you do anything? Carter sighed, leaning forward. We can file for a restraining order. But Jason's a public figure. He's not stupid enough to send direct threats himself. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. So he gets away with it? Carter hesitated. Not necessarily. We can investigate the accounts that sent these threats. If we can link any of them to Jason or his people, we have a case. Amber's heart pounded. And if you can't? Carter's eyes softened. Then we find another way. Amber exhaled slowly. She was tired, exhausted. She had been fighting for so long, and it felt like every step forward came with a new setback. But she wasn't going to stop. Jason wanted her silent. She refused to be. Later that night, Amber and Daniel sat in his apartment, a heavy silence between them. Amber sipped her tea, her hands still shaking. You think this will ever end? Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. I don't know. Amber stared at the city lights through the window. I used to love him, she whispered. Daniel looked at her. She let out a sad laugh. I really did. I thought we'd be together forever. And now I don't even recognize him. Daniel's voice was quiet. People like Jason never change. They just reveal who they really are. Amber nodded slowly. She turned to him. You know what scares me the most? Daniel tilted his head. What? Amber took a deep breath. That I don't know how far he'll go. Daniel's eyes darkened. Neither do I. Just then, a loud crash shattered the quiet night. Amber jumped to her feet, her heart slamming against her ribs. Daniel rushed to the window, and his entire body tensed. Amber followed his gaze. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone had smashed his car window and taped a note to the shattered glass. Daniel ran outside, Amber close behind. He ripped the paper from the glass and read it out loud. This is just the beginning. Amber felt the air leave her lungs. Jason wasn't playing games anymore, and if they didn't stop him soon, she might not survive what came next. Amber's heart pounded as she stared at the note in Daniel's hands. This is just the beginning. The words sent a chill down her spine. The jagged handwriting, the ominous message. It was Jason, or someone working for him. Daniel's jaw clenched. We need to call Carter. Amber barely heard him. Her ears were ringing. Her breath was coming too fast. The air felt too thick, too heavy. Amber, Daniel said, gripping her shoulders. Look at me. She forced her gaze to meet his. This is what Jason wants, Daniel said firmly. To make you afraid. To make you feel powerless. Don't give him that. Amber swallowed hard and nodded. Daniel pulled out his phone, dialing Carter's number. We've got a serious problem, he said the moment the detective answered. Someone vandalized my car and left a threatening note. Amber wrapped her arms around herself, glancing around the dark street. Were they still watching? Were they waiting for her to fall apart? Not this time. She wouldn't let Jason win. An hour later, Carter was at the scene, examining the broken glass and the note. He looked exhausted, like a man who had seen too much, but his eyes were sharp. This escalated fast, he muttered. Daniel crossed his arms. That's what happens when you push Jason into a corner. Carter exhaled. I'll have the note analyzed, but I doubt we'll get fingerprints. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Amber hugged herself. So what do we do? Carter's expression was grim. We put you somewhere safe. Daniel nodded. I agree. She can't stay here anymore. Amber's throat tightened. I don't want to run. Carter's voice was calm but firm. Amber, this isn't just about a divorce anymore. Jason is escalating. First, he cut off your finances. Then he started harassing you online. Now, he's sending physical threats. Amber's stomach twisted. He was right. Jason was testing how far he could go. Daniel sighed. I have a friend who owns a cabin outside the city. No one knows about it. It's isolated. Amber hesitated. For how long? Carter's lips pressed together. Until we can find a way to stop him. Amber took a shaky breath. She hated this. Hated that Jason still had this much control over her life. But she wasn't stupid. She nodded. Okay, let's go. The drive to the cabin was tense. The weight of everything pressed down on Amber's chest, making it hard to breathe. Daniel kept glancing at her. You okay? She let out a hollow laugh. Not even a little. Daniel sighed. I know this isn't what you wanted, but it's temporary. And we're going to take Jason down. Amber turned to him. How? He has money, power, connections. The police can't even touch him. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. Then we find something they can't ignore. Amber frowned. Like what? Daniel exhaled. A smoking gun. Amber shook her head. We had one. The recordings. He destroyed them. Daniel's eyes darkened. Maybe, but I don't believe Jason is invincible. Every powerful man has a weakness. We just have to find it. Amber swallowed hard. She wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that. Because if Jason truly was untouchable, she would never be free. The cabin was small but cozy, nestled deep in the woods. It was the kind of place that felt removed from the rest of the world, silent, isolated, safe. Or at least it should have been. Amber stood in the doorway, gripping her backpack. So what now? Daniel set their bags down. Now, we regroup. We figure out our next move. Amber sighed, rubbing her temples. I'm so tired. Daniel's expression softened. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. Amber hesitated. You think he'll find us? Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. Amber swallowed hard and nodded. She tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Jason was still out there, plotting, waiting, and she had a horrible feeling that he wasn't done yet. Meanwhile, back in the city, Jason sat in his office, his fingers drumming against his desk. His lawyer, Richard Hayes, paced in front of him. This is getting out of hand. Jason smirked. Is it? Richard stopped, turning to face him. You sent someone to vandalize her lawyer's car, Jason. That's a crime. Jason chuckled. No, someone vandalized his car. I had nothing to do with it. Richard exhaled sharply. I can't protect you if this keeps escalating. Jason leaned forward, his smile vanishing. Then find a way. Because I am not losing to her. Richard hesitated. What if she has more evidence? Jason's smirk returned. Then we make sure she never gets the chance to use it. Richard's face paled. What does that mean? Jason leaned back, taking a slow sip of whiskey. It means, he said, his voice dangerously calm, that Amber's running out of time, and in the back of his mind, he was already planning his next move. If threats weren't enough, if intimidation didn't work, he would take things to the next level, one way or another. Amber wasn't going to make it to court. Amber jolted awake. Her heart pounded as she sat up in the unfamiliar bed, her ears straining for any sound. The cabin was silent, but something felt off. The air was too still, too heavy. She glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. She reached for her phone, but there was no signal. Her throat tightened. Calm down. You're safe here. She took a slow breath and listened. Then she heard it. A faint crunch of footsteps outside. Amber froze. The cabin was deep in the woods. No one should be out there. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She slid out of bed as quietly as possible, her bare feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. She grabbed the closest thing she could use as a weapon, a heavy flashlight, then crept toward the window. The moonlight cast long shadows over the trees, but in the distance, just beyond the tree line, a figure stood watching. Amber's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't see his face, but she knew. Jason had found her. The figure didn't move. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something. Amber's grip tightened on the flashlight. She wanted to wake Daniel, but she was frozen, trapped between fear and rage. Then the figure took a slow step forward. Amber stumbled back, her heart racing. She turned and bolted down the hallway, throwing open Daniel's door. "Daniel, wake up!" Daniel was up in an instant, reaching for something. His phone, maybe. His eyes snapped to her. "What's wrong?" Amber's voice was shaky. "Someone's outside." Daniel's expression darkened. He was up in seconds, grabbing the gun he had brought with him for safety. Amber's breath hitched. She had never seen him with a gun before. "Stay behind me," he said. She didn't argue. They moved cautiously to the front door. Daniel peered through the peephole, then slowly unlocked it and stepped out onto the porch. Amber followed, her pulse racing. But when they stepped outside, the figure was gone. The woods were empty. Daniel scanned the area, his grip firm on the gun. "Are you sure?" Then he saw it. A piece of paper, nailed to one of the wooden beams of the porch. Daniel grabbed it, his jaw tightening as he read the words aloud. "I told you to stay quiet." Amber's stomach dropped. She had thought she was safe here. She had been wrong. Jason leaned back in his car, parked just out of sight. He watched as Daniel and Amber stood on the porch, looking around like scared little rabbits. He smirked. Good. Amber needed to know she would never escape him. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message. "Make your move tomorrow." Then he started the car and drove off, disappearing into the darkness. Tomorrow, Amber's little fight would end. Permanently. The next morning, Amber sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Daniel sat across from her, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping against the table. "We're leaving," he said. Amber shook her head. "He'll just find us again." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Then we change the game." Amber frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned forward. "We stop running, Amber. Jason's controlling everything right now. He's playing offense, and we're just reacting. That has to change." Amber swallowed hard. "And how do we do that?" Daniel's eyes darkened. "We trap him." Amber blinked. "Trap him?" Daniel nodded. "Jason's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. But if we can catch him in the act, if we can record him making threats, admitting what he's done, then we have something even stronger than the old recordings." Amber's breath hitched. "You want to lure him into confessing?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's risky, but right now it's our best shot." Amber hesitated. The thought of facing Jason again, of hearing his voice, made her stomach turn. But Daniel was right. Running wasn't working. It was time to fight back. She took a deep breath. "Let's do it." Daniel gave a sharp nod. "Then we set the bait." That afternoon, Amber made the call. She sat alone in the cabin, her hands trembling as she dialed the number she never thought she'd call again. Jason picked up on the first ring. Well, he drawled. "Finally came to your senses?" Amber forced herself to sound small. Weak. "Jason, please. I can't do this anymore." A pause. Then a low chuckle. "I knew you'd crack," Jason murmured. "So, what? You ready to drop the case? Crawl back?" Amber clenched her jaw. "I just want this to be over." Jason's voice was smooth, confident. "That's the first smart thing you've said in months." She swallowed hard. "Can we meet?" Jason was silent for a moment. Then, "Of course, sweetheart." Amber closed her eyes, gripping the phone tight. "Tonight?" Jason chuckled. "You miss me that much?" Amber forced a small laugh. "Just, let's meet. No lawyers. No court." Jason smirked. "Fine. But one condition." Amber's stomach tightened. "What?" Jason's voice dropped lower. "You come alone." Amber's fingers dug into her palm. She forced herself to say the words. "Okay." Jason chuckled. "Good girl. I'll text you the location." The line went dead. Amber exhaled sharply, her entire body trembling. Daniel stepped out from the hallway, his face grim. He had been listening. "You okay?" he asked. Amber nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. Daniel set a small recording device on the table. "Then let's end this." Amber swallowed hard, bracing herself. "Tonight, Jason thought he was walking into a trap for her. But this time, she was trapping him. Amber sat in the passenger seat of Daniel's car, gripping her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. The small recording device was taped inside the lining of her jacket, its tiny red light blinking steadily. She wasn't just walking into a meeting with Jason. She was walking into a battle. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked, his voice low, controlled. Amber swallowed hard. "I have to be." Daniel's jaw was tight as he pulled the car to a stop 2 blocks from the meeting spot, a deserted parking lot behind an abandoned office building. Jason's choice. Of course, he had picked a place where there would be no witnesses. Daniel turned to her. "I'll be close. The second anything feels wrong, you walk away. Got it?" Amber nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. Daniel hesitated, then reached out, squeezing her hand. "We're almost there," he said. "After tonight, this will be over." Amber wanted to believe him, but something deep inside her whispered, "Jason isn't going down without a fight." She stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and started walking toward the lot. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the meeting spot, Jason was already there. He leaned casually against the hood of his sleek black car, dressed in a crisp suit, looking as confident as ever. When he saw her, he grinned. "I have to say, I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you." Amber forced herself to keep walking, closing the distance between them. "Jason, I just want this to be over." His eyes gleamed with amusement. "You should have thought about that before running to the press." Amber swallowed hard. "Please, let's just talk." Jason smirked. "You know what I love about you, Amber? You always think you're in control." Amber's heart pounded. She had to get him talking. "I never wanted to fight," she said quietly. "You pushed me into this." Jason's smirk faded. "Oh, I pushed you? That's rich." He took a step closer, his voice turning cold. "You humiliated me. You made me look weak." Amber forced herself to meet his gaze. "I told the truth." Jason's jaw clenched. Then, just as quickly, he relaxed, chuckling. "That's adorable." Amber hesitated. She needed more. She needed him to say something incriminating. She took a slow breath. "Why did you do it, Jason?" "Freezing my accounts. Destroying my evidence. Sending threats." Jason's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Then he smiled. "Because I could." Amber's breath hitched. Jason tilted his head. "You think you're special, Amber? That you deserved anything from me?" He chuckled. "I let you have a good life. And the second I was done with you, I took it all back. That's how this works." Amber's pulse pounded. He was confessing. "Even the break-in?" she pressed. Jason's grin widened. "Oh, you mean your lawyer's office?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let's just say, I have friends who like to take care of things for me." Amber's breath caught. He admitted it. The recording was running. She had what she needed. But Jason wasn't finished. His smile turned predatory. "And you? You think this little act of defiance changes anything?" Amber's chest tightened. Jason leaned in, his voice low and threatening. "I own you, Amber. No court, no lawyer, no cop is going to change that." Amber's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "You're wrong." Jason chuckled. "Am I?" His hand suddenly shot out, grabbing her wrist. Amber gasped, trying to yank free, but his grip was iron tight. Jason's voice was a whisper now, his breath hot against her ear. "I could make you disappear tonight, and no one would ever find you." Panic flooded Amber's veins. Jason smiled, sensing her fear. "But I won't. Not yet. Because I want you to watch as I destroy everything you have left." Amber's mind screamed at her to run, but her feet were frozen. Jason's fingers dug into her skin. "You were never meant to win this." Then, a loud click filled the air. Jason stiffened. Amber's breath hitched as she turned her head. Daniel stood just a few feet away, his gun aimed directly at Jason's chest. His expression was deadly calm. "Let her go." Jason's grip tightened, just for a second. Then, slowly, he released her. Amber stumbled back, her pulse racing. Jason eyed Daniel, then laughed. Well, Looks like the knight in shining armor showed up after all. Daniel's finger hovered over the trigger. Walk away, Jason. This is over. Jason smirked. Oh, you wish it was. Amber clutched her jacket. The recording. She had it. Jason didn't know, and he was about to lose. But before Daniel could say anything else, headlights flooded the lot. Amber turned. Two black SUVs rolled in, tires screeching. Amber's blood ran cold. Jason smiled. Told you this wasn't over. The doors flew open. Men in dark suits stepped out. Amber's breath caught. Jason had brought backup. Daniel's grip tightened on his gun. Amber, get behind me. Jason straightened his jacket, looking smug. Did you really think I'd come here alone? Amber's heart pounded. Daniel couldn't fight them all. Jason stepped closer, grinning. You should have stayed quiet, Amber. Amber took a shaky breath. Then she whispered, too late for that, and she pressed send on the recording. Jason's smirk vanished as his phone buzzed. His men hesitated. Jason pulled out his phone, eyes narrowing. Then his expression dropped. Amber's voice echoed through the lot. His own words, playing back through the speakers. Jason's face twisted in fury. What did you? Amber's voice was steady now. I sent it to the police. To the media. To everyone. Jason's men looked uncertain now, glancing at him. Jason's jaw clenched. You stupid. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed in the distance. Daniel exhaled. Looks like the cavalry's here. Amber's knees nearly buckled. Jason turned, his face contorted with rage. You think this is over? Amber lifted her chin. I know it is. And as the sirens grew louder, Jason finally realized he had lost. The sirens screamed through the air, growing louder with every second. Jason's expression twisted from fury to something colder, fear. His men hesitated, glancing at each other. They hadn't signed up for this. Amber's heart pounded as she stepped closer to Daniel. The recording had been sent. Jason was out of time. Daniel kept his gun trained on him. This ends tonight, Jason. Jason's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring. Then, he moved. In a flash, he spun toward his car, reaching for something inside. Daniel didn't hesitate. Bang! The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the parking lot. Amber gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jason froze, his hand inches from the car door. The bullet hadn't hit him, but it had buried itself into the metal of his car, a clear warning shot. Daniel's voice was sharp, controlled. Try that again, and the next one won't miss. Jason turned slowly, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His cocky smirk was gone. The flashing red and blue lights grew brighter, illuminating the dark lot. The police cars skidded to a stop, and within seconds, armed officers swarmed the area. Hands up, a commanding voice shouted. Jason's men immediately complied, dropping their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. But Jason? He just stood there. His eyes locked onto Amber, and for the first time, he looked truly cornered. Detective Carter was the first to step out of a squad car, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. When he saw Jason, he didn't even blink. Well, Carter muttered. Didn't expect to catch you this easily. Jason's fists clenched. I didn't do anything. Amber let out a shaky laugh. That's funny, because I have a recording that says otherwise. Jason's face twisted with fury. Carter nodded at his officers. Take him in. Two officers approached Jason, but he lunged before they could grab him. He moved fast, too fast. Amber barely had time to react before Jason's hand snatched her wrist. Panic exploded in her chest. No. Jason yanked her toward him, his other arm wrapping around her like a vice. Daniel's gun snapped back up, aimed right at Jason's head. Let her go. Jason smirked. Or what? The officers moved in, but Jason tightened his grip on Amber. She gasped, struggling, but he was strong. You think you won? Jason sneered, his breath hot against her ear. This doesn't end here. You have no idea who you're messing with. Amber's hands shook, but she forced herself to breathe. And then, she lifted her foot and slammed her heel down on his shin. Jason yelped, his grip loosening just enough. Amber ripped free and stumbled back. Daniel lunged. The next second, Jason was on the ground. Daniel had tackled him, pinning him hard against the pavement. Jason struggled, but Daniel pressed a knee into his back, locking him down. "You're done," Daniel growled. Jason snarled, but before he could say another word, cuffs snapped around his wrists. Carter stood over him, unimpressed. "Jason Monroe, you're under arrest." Jason's face was red with rage, but he couldn't move. Amber stood a few feet away, her chest heaving. Her wrist throbbed where Jason had grabbed her, but she was free. She let out a slow, shaky breath. It was over. Jason was finished. The next hours passed in a blur. Amber sat in the back of a police car, answering questions, giving statements, letting them take photos of the bruises forming on her wrist. The weight that had been crushing her for months was finally lifting. Jason had been led away in cuffs, his face contorted with rage. But no amount of money or power could save him now, because Amber had the truth. And this time, the whole world was watching. Daniel sat beside her, his face still tense. "You okay?" Amber let out a shaky laugh. I finally am." Daniel exhaled, rubbing his face. "You scared the hell out of me back there." Amber looked at him. "I scared myself." For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. Jason Monroe had spent months trying to silence her. But now, the only thing he had left was a jail cell. And Amber? She was finally free. But she knew this wasn't the end, because there was still one more battle left to fight. Tomorrow, she would face him in court, and she would make sure he never hurt anyone again. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras flashing as Amber stepped inside. The tension in the air was thick, nearly suffocating. This was it, the final battle. Amber had spent months fighting Jason Monroe, his power, his lies, his cruelty. But today, she would win. She took a deep breath and walked to her seat. Daniel was already there, his face sharp with focus. "You ready?" Amber nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I have to be." Daniel's eyes softened. "You don't have to be alone in this." Amber exhaled. "I know." The doors at the far end of the courtroom slammed open. A hush fell over the crowd. Jason Monroe walked in, flanked by his high-priced lawyers. Even in handcuffs, even in an orange jumpsuit, he still held his head high, like he thought he could still win. Amber's stomach twisted. Jason was a master manipulator. If anyone could find a way to slip through the cracks, it was him. The judge entered, and the court was called to order. Amber's heart pounded as Jason's lawyer stood. "Your Honor," the man said smoothly, "my client is a respected businessman. He has been unjustly targeted by a vindictive ex-wife who—" Daniel shot up from his chair. "Objection." The judge nodded. "Sustained." "Stick to the facts, Mr. Hayes." Jason's lawyer didn't even blink. "The fact remains that my client was provoked. He merely acted in response to Ms. Monroe's baseless accusations." Amber's fists clenched under the table. "Baseless accusations?" Daniel stood again. "Your Honor, the only reason we are here today is because Mr. Monroe went to extreme lengths to silence my client, freezing her accounts, hiring people to intimidate her, even attempting to assault her in a parking lot." Jason let out a laugh, shaking his head. Amber's blood boiled. The judge turned to Jason. "Mr. Monroe, do you deny these accusations?" Jason smirked. "Of course, Your Honor. I love my ex-wife. I would never harm her." Amber nearly choked on her rage. Daniel didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit one final piece of evidence." Jason's smirk faltered. His lawyer turned to him sharply. "What evidence?" Daniel pulled a flash drive from his briefcase. "A recording." Jason went pale. The recording. The one Amber had sent to the police before he was arrested. Daniel turned toward the court official, handing over the drive. Within moments, the courtroom filled with Jason's voice. "Because I could. I let you have a good life. And the second I was done with you, I took it all back. I have friends who like to take care of things for me. I could make you disappear tonight, and no one would ever find you." The room was dead silent. The jury stared at Jason in horror. The judge's face was stone cold. Jason's lawyer dropped his pen. Amber felt her hands tremble, but she didn't look away, because this was the moment she had been fighting for. Jason had no more excuses, no more lies, no more power. Jason's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His usual arrogance vanished. For the first time, he looked small, like he knew he had lost. The judge turned to the jury. "I believe we've heard enough." Amber's breath caught as the jury foreman stood. The verdict was immediate. Guilty. The word rippled through the courtroom. Jason's head snapped up. No, wait. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Mr. Monroe, you have been found guilty on multiple counts, including harassment, financial coercion, and conspiracy to intimidate a witness. You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison." The courtroom erupted. Amber covered her mouth, a sob breaking free. It was over. Jason wasn't getting away with it. Officers moved toward him, grabbing his arms. Jason thrashed, "You can't do this. I built everything." His voice was panicked. He turned, his eyes locking onto Amber. "You think you won? You're nothing without me." Amber stood, lifting her chin, and for the first time, Jason Monroe meant absolutely nothing to her. She turned her back as they dragged him away. Outside the courthouse, the cameras flashed. Reporters called her name, but Amber barely heard them. She felt lighter. For months, Jason had tried to destroy her, but she had survived. Daniel appeared at her side, watching as Jason was shoved into the back of a police van. "You did it," he murmured. Amber exhaled, a real, genuine smile breaking across her face. "We did it." Daniel smirked. "So, what now?" Amber looked at the sky, feeling free for the first time in years. "Now," she let out a breath. "Now, I start over." And this time, she was in control of her own life. The crisp autumn air wrapped around Amber as she stood outside the courthouse, watching Jason's police van disappear down the road. For months, he had been a shadow over her life, poisoning everything he touched. Now, he was nothing more than a bad memory. Daniel stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, a small smirk playing at his lips. "So, how does it feel?" Amber let out a slow breath. "Like I can finally breathe." And she meant it. For too long, Jason had dictated her life. What she could do, where she could go, who she was allowed to be. But now, she was free. Daniel nudged her shoulder lightly. "You sure you don't want to give a dramatic speech to the reporters? I won't be silenced, or something." Amber laughed, shaking her head. "I think I've done enough talking for one lifetime." Daniel's smirk softened. "Well, in case you forgot, you won." Amber let the words sink in. She had won. Not just in court, but against the fear, the doubt, the voice in her head that had told her she wasn't strong enough to fight back. Jason had tried to break her, but she was still standing. Daniel glanced at his watch. "Come on, let's get out of here." "I'm starving." Amber chuckled. "Where are we going?" Daniel smirked. "Anywhere you want. Your choice." Amber blinked. For so long, she hadn't been allowed to choose. Jason had controlled everything. What they ate, where they lived, how she spent her days. But now, it was her life again. Her choice. Amber smiled. "Then let's go somewhere new." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "New?" Amber nodded. "Somewhere I've never been before. Somewhere I can start fresh." Daniel's grin widened. "I like the sound of that." They started walking down the courthouse steps together, the weight of the past finally lifting off Amber's shoulders. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Amber ignored them. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't looking back. She was looking forward. And as she walked away from her old life, one thought rang clear in her mind. She had survived. And nothing, not Jason, not fear, not the past, was going to stop her now.